Hey friends, it's Spence. Today I will be doing my April reading wrap-up. I'll be talking about 17 books. Of all of these books for the past month, there are unfortunately no new favorites, so it's been kind of a bad reading month. There were some good books, but nothing honestly just blew me away, unlike the 3 books that are my favorites so far this year, which are Legends and Lattes, Piranesi, and Queen of the Tiles. Now, is there a theme to the books that I read this month? Not really, because I initially, for my booktube bestie's birthday, I initially wanted to read her favorites. So if you know Claude's from Book Bosom Claude's, I wanted to read some of her favorites, so I kind of looked at the books that she rated 5 stars on Goodreads and listed them down. And unfortunately, because I am too much of a mood reader and I got tired because of some bad reads this month, I was kind of in a slump and I wasn't really able to get to a lot of the books that I had initially planned on reading. Anyway, did you really need to know all of that? Not really, so let's proceed. So the first book I'm going to talk about is something that I read actually at the end of March, which is The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. This is the first book in His Dark Materials trilogy. I think it's also known as The Northern Lights in like the UK printing. This is a very popular fantasy series, particularly because it's often called like the Atheist Chronicles of Narnia. In this story we follow Lyra, who lives in this world where people have souls that manifest in the form of demons, and these demons are in the form of animals. And if you're a child, these animals kind of like shift forms often, and when you become an adult, your demon settles into one single animal form. There's not much I can really say without pretty much explaining what the story is and like kind of spoiling it, but suffice it to say, if you're not familiar with the story, it's basically a critique on organized religion in a very steampunk fantasy setting. I did not expect to like this as much as I should. I wanted to read this because I already owned the books. I really enjoyed it and I really appreciated Phil Pullman's writing style. It's really good. It's definitely not for everyone. It's something that I didn't really expect to love, but with the setting that it's in, I really loved the way that things are described, like all the blimps and like how demons work and the dust and the magic system. All of that was just really done well, I think, and I really enjoyed the critique on organized religion. I think Philip Pullman was particularly criticizing like the Catholic Church. Nothing against Catholics, but I really liked the discussions that this book kind of attempted to make with that. And I just overall really loved the fantasy setting. I already loved the TV show adaptation, and to finally read the source material was kind of a rewarding experience. The next book that I read is She Came to Slay: The Life and Times of Harriet Tubman by Erica Armstrong Dunbar. So this is a short, illustrated nonfiction book that talks about the life of Harriet Tubman. I'm not American, so I didn't really get to know from my history who Harriet Tubman was and what the Underground Railroad was. And this was just really, number one, informative and also really inspiring. It was really cool that, like, you know, Harriet Tubman and all these other amazing people like really existed in history and did all these amazing things. But it was also really horrific to see the impact that slavery had in America. The next book that I read is another Erin Entrada Kelly book. I say another because I read a few earlier this year, and that is Hello Universe. And this is, I think, Erin Entrada Kelly's most popular work because it had won the Newbery Medal. And I honestly thought I was gonna really love this story. In this story, we follow Virgil Salinas, and he basically has a crush on this deaf girl, and he's trying to navigate that because he's like very shy and very introverted. I know that sounds like super rom-com cheesy, but it's not so much about his crush, but more so his journey of self-discovery and kind of like breaking out of his shell. Again, I thought I was really gonna love this. Unfortunately, I mean, I did like it. I did not hate it by any means. It's just that I had very high expectations for this since it had won the Newbery. It's by Erin Entrada Kelly. I just realized that from reading this book that like not Erin Entrada Kelly book is going to be for me, and that I have to be in a very specific mood to read an Erin Entrada Kelly book because her books are very atmospheric, they're very calm and soothing. So if you're not in the mood for that, if you want something more fast-paced, then you probably are not going to enjoy her books. But I still liked it, and I liked the message, and I love the Filipino-American representation, so There you go. The next book that I read is the worst book that I read for the past month, and that is Dragon Pearl by Yoon-Ha Lee. This is a Rick Riordan Presents book, so if you are not familiar with Rick Riordan Presents, basically Rick Riordan tries to highlight different authors from diverse backgrounds and who are telling stories about the mythology of where they came from. Does that make sense? Basically, this is a Korean-inspired sci-fi fantasy middle grade book. And I really love the concept of this book because we follow our main character who, her brother just died. That's like at the beginning of the book, so it's not a spoiler. Her brother just died, and she finds out that he died while he was in search of something called the Dragon Pearl, which yields a lot of power that could like terraform universes, things like that. I honestly don't remember that much about this story because I just really did not vibe with it, particularly because of the writing style. I loved this book had so much potential because once I understood how the magic worked and what these different creatures are like. For example, our main character is a fox spirit who kind of takes like a human form. So that to me was fascinating. So I was like hooked at the beginning, but immediately, like from I think chapter 2 or 3, the story just lost me because the writing style was so, I read in a review that it's very laundry list, like this happened and this happened and this happened, and that is so accurate to this book. I just did not enjoy this writing style by Yoon-Ha Lee. The next book that I read was also something I struggled with, which was American Gods by Neil Gaiman. So this, I believe, is Neil Gaiman's most popular work based on like the Goodreads like number of ratings. Like this is the most rated book. And I'm starting to realize, or maybe I'm totally wrong, but I'm starting to think that Neil Gaiman's like more adult works might just not be for me because I've enjoyed his middle grade works, particularly like The Graveyard Book, and I read The Ocean at the End of the Lane and I liked it, but it wasn't something that I like genuinely enjoyed. And so with this American Gods being a very adult work, that they're very mature scenes and themes that they're being explored, I just did not enjoy it. And it's not Neil Gaiman's fault or the book's fault. It didn't match my taste. In this book, we follow the perspective of Shadow, who is a very mysterious man, and he is approached by this man called Wednesday. And basically, well, I can't tell you too much about it, but basically, the concept of the book is that there are old gods, the ones we know from mythology, and there are new gods like the god of like wealth and media, and just the sort of thing that like there are new gods arising and they are a threat to the old gods, basically. And even though I didn't like this, I would recommend this to people if you like those books that are just like all vibes and little plot. I mean, this did have a plot, but it was mostly just vibes. And if you like really dark fantasy, like really, really adult themes, and like, yeah, if you like something really dark and just like whimsical and weird, then this book might be for you. The next book that I finished was Serafina by Rachel Hartman. Now this was a book that Claus had rated 5 stars, though she told me later on that it was like years ago that she's read this book, so her tastes have kind of changed since then. But I picked this book up because I already owned it, so like I was trying to go for a theme, but well, we know how that turned out. Anyway, Serafina is a fantasy young adult, and we follow Serafina, who is a musical coach, instructor to the princess, and Serafina is like half dragon, half human. And in this world, dragons, they've kind of evolved to be able to take human form or human-esque form so that they can live at peace with the humans. However, whenever they take human form, they still exhibit a lot of dragon-like qualities. Aside from like scales on their skin, they also struggle with dealing with human emotion, which is very different from how dragons are kind of built like emotionally. In this book, a person in like the human royalty has been killed, and it's suspected that he was killed by a dragon. So there's this threat that, you know, the treaty might be broken and there might be violence between the dragons and the humans. And Serafina, being half dragon, half human, finds herself in the middle of this, and you know, she feels like it's kind of her duty to reunite everyone, sort of a thing. Now, this is another one of those books that I get why people love it. It's very atmospheric. The writing style is very purple. Like Rachel Hartman can write. I just don't like Rachel Hartman's writing style. It was just very, it was very purple. Everything was described well, and I don't use the term purple prose as a criticism. It just is. It's very fancy. Everything's described. A lot of metaphors are being used that some of them just like completely flew over my head. And so I like the story somewhat, but the writing style, it was a little much. Will I read the sequel? Probably not, especially since Claus told me not to even bother, so there you go. I also read after this the prequel, which is The Audition, which I actually liked more than Serafina. It's basically how Serafina auditioned to be the musical instructor to the princess. And it was a pretty fun story. The next book that I read is Jade City by Fonda Lee. This is a book that I buddy read with Claude's, and I struggled for the first half. Like, it was one of those books that it spent so much time with the world building and introducing the characters and like making sure that you understand like the character dynamics and how things work before it actually gets into like the action and stuff. So by the second half, I really enjoyed it. It was a fun ride. Fun is a relative term, but it was a wild ride. It was intense, but I struggled for the first half of it because it was just taking its time to explain everything. It was info dumpy in a sense, but I just struggled to be like 100% interested in the world building. This is a popular, or becoming a popular, adult urban fantasy book. It's the first in a series, and we follow basically these two warring clans who basically control jade in their country. And jade is kind of this substance that if you like pierce yourself with jade, it like enhances your physical abilities and your senses. So the people who are able to wield jade, or the people in the clans, they are the ones who are in power. It's often described as The Godfather, but make it fantasy. So there you go. The next book that I read is something that I really thought was going to be a new favorite, and that is Every Heart a Doorway by SEANAN McGuire. And that's because this book has so often been pitched as like a Narnia-esque story, and it's really not. It's really not, because like Narnia is like so wholesome and like whimsical fantasy, just like super fluffy, super nice, a very Christian fantasy adventure. But this is far from that. This is dark, a murder mystery fantasy. I don't think enough people are referring to it that way. It's very dark, it's a murder mystery. Also, everyone who told me that this was middle grade, this is not middle grade, people. This is adult dark fantasy. I did enjoy this though. I liked it enough to be interested to continue the series, because in this story we follow basically these children who, before the book, they had their own sort of like portal fantasy adventure. So they've been to different worlds, but they were sent back to our world, and now they're basically trying to get back, or trying to get back to those fantasy worlds where they felt that it was their new home, that they belonged there. Eleanor West, like kind of the headmistress of all these children, kind of like took all these children under her wing to help them navigate this problem. Then murder happens, and they kind of have to figure out who did it and what the motives are. I would recommend this to people who like Witchwood by Tahara Mafi, because that is also dark fantasy. A sprinkle of weirdness, a sprinkle of magic, a sprinkle of dark stuff. So, there. The next book that I read is, surprise, surprise, it's a self-help business nonfiction book that I almost swore off that I would never read, but because it was gifted to me, I felt that I should read it. And this is Rich Dad, Poor Dad, What the Rich Teach Their Kids That the Poor and Middle Class Do Not. And this is by Robert T. Kiyosaki. And this is a very popular like self-help business book or finance book. And I have very mixed feelings about this book, because on one hand, this did make me think a lot about, my financial literacy, which I'm totally not financially literate, is my main takeaway from this book. And I need to, learn more about how money works and all that stuff. It did give me a lot to think about. But that said, there were just like some things in this book that I either don't really have a strong opinion on, or just felt morally edgy to me. Like, is that morally okay? Sort of a thing, in terms of like how money works and how you obtain your money, sort of a thing. So yeah, I honestly just need to learn more how money works in a political sense, I think, because there are just some things here that I'm like, am I okay with that? And do I subscribe to that? Probably not. So there you go. The next book that I read, this was the point where I was just like in a reading slump, because after all these exhausting reads, which were either like tiring because so much world building was happening, or the writing style was just like exhausting. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna read a graphic novel. And what did I read? I read Maze Runner, The Death Cure, the official movie prelude. And this, if you're familiar with the Maze Runner movies, this is basically what ties in the second and third movies, like The Scorch Trials and The Death Cure. And I enjoyed this book. Number one, probably because I already love these characters from the books. The Maze Runner series is one of my favorite series. And I love the art style, and I also loved how it smoothly tied in some things that are not explained so much in the movie, but are just like really cool new, I guess, bits of additional information about the story, and I really enjoyed it. The next book that I read is Ain't Burned All the Bright by Jason Reynolds and Jason Griffin. So this book is basically a poem slash short story with beautiful, beautiful illustrations. And in this story, we follow a Black family living in America during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as during the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. This was so short, but this was so impactful. Like, this book packed such a punch that I did not expect. And this is my first Jason Reynolds book, and I have heard so many great things about his other works. And so to get this kind of taste of how he writes was just like really great, because I was like, man, if he could pack a punch in like a single poem like that, how much more would his novels and verse be impactful to me, sort of a thing. So I'm excited to read more of Jason Reynolds' work. So there you go. The next book that I read is 1984, and this is another book that Claude's rated 5 stars. But also, after I talked to her about it, she was like, yeah, it was a struggle to finish this. And I struggled with this. The thing is, I appreciated 1984 by George Orwell because it's classic. It's been impactful in the like political landscape and how we view like the government. It's basically George Orwell taking an entire novel, painting a picture of what it's like to have a totalitarian government. Is that what it is? It touches on a lot of things like historical revisionism and like censorship. But the thing is, my main question with 1984 is, did it have to be this long? Because after I think 5 chapters, I was like, okay, I think I get it. I get the point. I get the message. I get what this world is like. But then he just keeps on describing so much more about what this world is like, and I'm just like, it's not really adding much to the story. Can we get something else? It didn't need to be as long as it was. That's basically just my point. I appreciated it, but George Orwell, calm down. Next is another long book, which I also felt was a little too long, and that is Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. This is a buddy read at my book club, Tarabasa. If you are Filipino over the age of 18, link down below. And this is basically a family drama during a time of war between Korea and Japan. We follow this Korean family, particularly a woman named Sunja, like her childhood, as well as, you know, as she grows into her old age and her descendants. And I absolutely loved like the first half of the book. Like, I was just fascinated. I loved following these characters, and I fell in love with so many of them. But by the second half, this book just kind of lost me, particularly because a character that I really loved just wasn't a part of the second half of the book. And, you know, when that character was gone, I was just like, I'm just not that much interested in what happens after, sort of a thing. And that's probably because this is a multi-generational story, and so like we shift the focus of the story from different generations. That said, though, I think this was very well written, and I get the appeal that it has and the impact that it has had. So I appreciate this book. It just wasn't my cup of tea by the second half. Are we seeing a theme here after all? Because like, I feel like I've read so many books this month that are just like that. Like, I get why they're so loved, but I just did not love them. Speaking of love, the Heartstopper adaptation came out a week ago, I think, and it has brought me so much joy. I want to do a review, but I'm also lazy, so I'm not going to do it. Anyway, I've already read the Heartstopper novels last year, so I read this time the mini comics. It's like a collection of short comics. They're basically like alternate universes where what if this happened, or what if Charlie and Nick met this way, or just like a lot of like different short stories. And I thought it was adorable. Nothing super special, but it was adorable, and I'm always happy to see Charlie and Nick being happy, which is part of the reason why I'm scared to read Nick and Charlie. Another graphic novel that I read is another Maze Runner official movie prelude to the Scorch Trials, which ties the events of the Maze Runner and Scorch Trials. This one I did not love, actually, and this just kind of, aside from the art style being kind of wonky, I just thought that this just solidifies why I did not like the direction that the adaptation took, that completely deviated from the second book in the series. While it does explain a lot of things to, like, you know, connect the first and the second movie, I was just like, yeah, that's why I did not like the choices that they made there. That said, though, I think these books weren't marketed enough when the movies were out, because I feel like these like graphic novels, like in between the movies, are kind of required reading to understand where the movies like ended, or kind of what direction they took. So there's that. It's a little too late for that, but you know, at least I know now. And finally, the last book that I read is Aesop's Fables, obviously by Aesop, and I read the Collins Classics collection. And I thought it was delightful. This was a delightful collection of short stories, or, you know, obviously fables. A lot of which kind of like unlocked so many memories of my childhood, because I was like, I know this story, and it's so cool to like be able to relive some of those memories. And there are a lot of new ones that I read I've never heard before that were really thought-provoking. In fact, I actually kind of annotated them. So that was a delight to see, to revisit some of these fables and discover new ones. That is it for this wrap-up, and it's honestly like boring. Like, if you haven't reached this part of the video, I totally understand, because like all of these books, yes, there are some popular books here, but like I just was not impressed enough to be like, I just did not need to do that. I was basically not impressed by any book for the past month, and so here's hoping that the next month will be better. Anyway, if you're here, wow, thank you, you're amazing. Subscribe, like, comment, share, do all the things. And yeah, I'll see you next time.